Are we good? Hello? All right. So I first have to say I'm totally amazed that there's this many people here. When I first signed up to do this, I said, I want to come and talk about sort of web design topics and kind of conceptual things and show some things that I think are cool. And they were like, well, we got some good Azure sessions and some good SharePoint sessions. We don't know if anyone is really going to be all that interested, but, we can give you a nice, decent-sized room. And so here's where we are. So I really do just appreciate that all of you all are interested in this topic, and hopefully we'll be as excited about it as I am. So what we're going to do is I'm going to kind of break this up just a little bit. So the first part, we're going to talk about sort of HTML5, and I'm not going to sort of go through a, what is HTML5 type of thing. What I really want to do is sort of frame the way that Microsoft thinks about HTML5, because there's a lot of questions that come up as to like, what is HTML5? Is it a spec or is it, the big soup of this? And then also Internet Explorer. What are you all thinking about this? Why don't you all just give up, use something like WebKit and, move on? And of course, the big question is IE6. What the heck are you guys still doing with that beast? And I've got some things to talk about there. Then what we'll spend most of the time doing is talking about sort of the future things that are coming up, which is mostly around CSS3. And then I'll actually come up with sort of a framework for how to think about these things after we've talked about it and apply it to your websites and your web apps. Then we're going to spend just a little time on web fonts in the time that we have left. So now, if you don't know who I am, I'm Thomas Lewis. I work as an HTML5 evangelist in Redmond, Washington. So you might have noticed I don't have an Australian accent. It's sort of a Texas weird thing. But one of the things that I was asked was, well, when you go over to Australia, we have a lot of messaging and marketing that we need to talk to these folks about. So will you please do that? And I said, not really. So what I did was I actually squeezed the marketing down to 4 slides. And I said, what I'll do is I'll use the rest of the time just to show cool demos of HTML5 apps. So the question to you is, would you prefer me to show the HTML5 demos with 4 slides of marketing, or would you like the 20 slides of marketing? All right. So good. I'm glad we're on the same wavelength here. So I'm going to show you a couple of things. So the first is this really cool application that was built by the Disney folks and a team called Vectorform. And how many of you all are familiar with Tron? Okay, good. Because in my life when I was a kid, and I'm probably showing my age here, I used to love to go to arcades and play games. If I found a quarter on the street, I was like, oh, awesome. I'd go pick that quarter up, I'd run to an arcade, and the thing is, I don't know if it was the same way in Australia, but our arcades were actually kind of creepy. They were these kind of dark places out in sort of the middle of nowhere with a bunch of strange people in the middle of the day who didn't have jobs for some reason. But I just thought this was like life, like, oh, someday I wish there was the ability to, play games for a living. And little did I know that would be true, but I wouldn't make that direction. Well, one of the coolest games was Tron. And then what they did was they took the Tron game and they made this really good movie that was just amazing. Then they made a second movie with Tron that was really, really bad. So we were unfortunate there. But Disney came up with this really cool concept for their sort of comic book that they built. So they built this site here called Disney Tron. And what would happen is that you would scroll it like a comic book, and the kind of the jaggedness is just me and my fingers here, but it actually scrolls very, very smooth here. Now, what's cool about this is that it's actually using something called Canvas, which is a drawing API in HTML5. But what's neat is that you would look at this and you go, oh, there's all these pictures and you're just kind of moving them around. That's kind of great, but we've been doing that since 1994. Well, what's neat is that these aren't actually images. These are actually rendered drawings. In fact, when you see the lightning back there, that is rendered out as well, and we're basically compositing these things together. And what's kind of cool is we're using Internet Explorer, so of course it's hardware accelerated, and it's cool because a lot of the other browsers are either implementing hardware acceleration or they have it. So it runs really quick and really smooth. So you can see here that we can actually go faster than it takes to actually pull down and render out some of the images that we have here, and I don't know why it's waiting on that. But these are the kind of cool things that we can do with HTML5 that we couldn't do before. Now, I would assume that everybody has seen Pac-Man, right? World's Biggest Pac-Man? Okay, yeah, I thought Michael Kordahi probably shows that everywhere. And that's a really cool, again, a sample app that is kind of based on a game. But one of the cool ones that I actually had the chance to work on was this thing called Endless Mural. And so what we did was we went and talked to Joshua Davis. And Joshua Davis is this kind of artist/skater guy. So he does a lot of Flash work, and he does what's called generative art, which means that the art is generated, he doesn't actually paint the pixels himself. And it's kind of cool because I remember a story one time where he was doing something for BMW at this showing. And, BMW, they had the guys in the corporate suits and stuff, and they see this guy who has all these tattoos and everything, and, they are talking amongst themselves, and this guy comes over to Joshua Davis and says, when will the art show up on these displays? And he said, whenever the computer tells me it's done. And I just thought that was kind of the coolest thing that, someone could, number one, say that to suits that were paying him like $1 million to build this type of art. But it's kind of cool because all of his art is pretty much generative. So what he did for us was he actually built a website called Endless Mural. And what you do is you can go in and you can actually view this mural. And these different artist images that you see here are actually done by just anybody. So if you go to Endless Mural today, you can actually go in and build one. And if I want to take a look at a particular one, I can actually not only see it, but I can actually see how it's rendered. So here, this is actually rendering out the art in a variety of ways. So there's a lot of different kind of brushes and things that could be used. You can run this on any browser that supports Canvas. If you have something that's using hardware acceleration, it's going to be definitely much faster. But as well as that, it's kind of cool that you can see this thing is getting built. Now, how does it get built? Well, we can go in and actually draw our own here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to define my gesture behavior. So I'm going to go with spirals. I'm going to twist them just a little bit more. Say that I'm done here. Then I'm going to go into the artwork. He's got different artists here, but I'm going to go ahead and pick Joshua Davis, and I'm a big fan of the coat of arms. So I'm going to pick out this, and I'll pick out a different color, and say I'm done. Now I'm going to create art. So you can see me doing it live here on stage. Now I know what you're saying to yourself. Wow, Thomas is, not only is he, a presenter, but he's also an artist. Well, no. It's actually because of the coolness of what he's done here. So it actually renders out based on these things that I've drawn. Again, I can go back and change my brushes and my templates and things like that, and I can render this thing out. And you can go ahead and share this with your friends. So I'm hoping that someday, that I can just draw this art and people will pay, at least $1 for it, and maybe I can buy another cup of coffee here. Now, another cool thing that was built was this interactive storybook for Jack and the Beanstalk. I'm assuming everybody knows the story of Jack and the Beanstalk. And so what happened was I actually got to work with a group that came up with sort of this book idea. And you can see like sort of the beans falling. And those beans are actually using a JavaScript-based physics library. So that's why when they, hit something, they kind of bounce off of it and they have sort of a gravitational effect. The other cool thing they did was they actually put in gestures. gestures. So here, if I just go ahead and make that gesture, it will go ahead and take me to another screen.
Walking along the road.
Audio you hear is actually using HTML5 audio.
They're magic beans, and they'll make you rich.
Let's keep moving on.
Mother,
and there's a lot of fun things you can do, like
these beans.
You can grab the mailbox and move it around, and beans are getting thrown everywhere.
Oh, those beans were magic, he said. They've grown in the night.
And then I'll continue to do this.
At the top of the beanstalk as he climbed up through the...
We're going to turn that audio off because it's making me crazy. The cool thing is this duck... this duck has a problem that it drops these golden eggs. And what was kind of cool is that, we always are trying to sort of stress test things when we are putting them out. And what will happen is over time, the goose will keep laying these golden eggs. And what was kind of cool was, like, over time, I had left it overnight, and these eggs just kept getting bigger and bigger, and it just kept going and going. And I never found, like, sort of the end to which you could continue to create these eggs. And the beauty of it was that there was no memory problems with it as well. The memory pretty much stayed exactly the same no matter how many eggs. So a lot of times what you'll do is you'll just sit here and you'll just kind of click on this duck while it just kind of lays golden eggs. And I don't know why I'm fixated on that, but for some reason I just think it's the coolest thing ever. And then what they did was they actually implemented this little trick. So you can see here the floating clouds. And then let's go one more. And so it ends very happily ever after. And then the giant falls, and then he actually makes the browser move around. And that was kind of a cheap little trick. You're not actually supposed to be able to do that with the browser, but they came up with a kind of a really cool hack to make that happen. And again, all of it's built with Physics Engine, built in. So you can go in and you can mess around with the giant here and throw him around and things like that, which are just a lot of fun. And then finally, I want to show you another little game called Jitterbug. So basically what you do is you're sort of in this Parisian place with this band of birds, singing. And what you want to do is you want to lasso these butterflies as they're moving around, and as you lasso them, the music gets a lot faster and it jams a lot better, and it's a lot of fun. The only problem is it's kind of hard to play, so I'm always just, see, oh, there we go. See, and now the band starts playing, which is really cool. But you only have a certain amount of time, and like I said, you have to have a little bit of skill here, which I'm not doing too good of a job here. So I'm not going to force you to watch me play horribly. You do get to a point which you run out of time and the band just, which tells you that you're really bad. The funny part was when we built this, or when they built this, because of the hardware acceleration, the game was too fast. So, like, no one could do birds fast enough, except the person who actually built the game. Like, he was like, I don't understand why y'all are having problems. And we're like, well, no one can do this fast enough. So we actually had to slow the game down a bit. And people actually, I won't mention certain browsers, but there was a browser that's not very hardware accelerated, and it was slow, and, like, you could do really good on it. So it sometimes hardware acceleration helps, and sometimes it's something you got to just think about in your experience. So these are just a few of the samples of the things that you can do with HTML5. These are kind of more of the, I would say the fun samples. There's also some things that are probably a little more what I would call mundane. So let's see if this works here. All right. So let's just briefly talk about sort of HTML5 and what does it mean. So if you talk to people today and you say, what is HTML5? There's sort of two camps, right? There's sort of the very dogmatic people who believe that it is the HTML5 spec and it's nothing more than that. So it's only those HTML5 elements. Beyond that, That's, marketing. Then there's another group who says, well, when we think of HTML5, we think of it as being all-encompassing of HTML5, the new things in CSS3, as well as JavaScript 5. The way that Microsoft thinks about it, they are in that sort of second camp, where we sort of believe that HTML5 is kind of this big grouping of all of them, because it's easier to talk about it, and a lot of times I'll just say it's HTML5 and related technologies. Now, there's questions that will always come up, which is, hey, why is it you guys are slow? I have these other browsers, and every 2 weeks they're sending me, new versions and updates and things like that. And part of it is just the way that we sort of have kind of come to how we think about building things. So what we do is we sort of look at a spec that's being built by the W3C and worked on by the W3C and other communities, and we say, okay, where does this spec fall? If it's something that we think is very practical and something that you could definitely use today, we put that in kind of our shipping bucket. So today that's IE9. And what we believe is that anything that's in IE9 is going to be there for a mighty long time. For example, there was this situation with WebSockets, where what happened was another browser vendor actually put WebSockets in a shipping browser. Found out that things are changing and it's not actually working right. In fact, there were like 60 different revisions to that spec. They actually pulled it out and then later on put it back in again. And there was also a little bit of a security problem as well. So the thing is that, yes, we can say that we definitely want all these new features, but we also need to make sure that they are ready. Now, that doesn't mean that gives us carte blanche to, sit on our hands and not do anything. So what we do is we actually take our kind of next version and we release it as platform previews, and that's what you see here. And what we're doing basically is we're on this kind of fast process for a big company like Microsoft. We used to, for IE9, every 6 to 8 weeks we were putting out a platform preview. Now we're at approximately 8 to 10 weeks for a platform preview. And each time we put one out, we have sort of a new feature. Now those features are subject to change, and I'll kind of talk about that here in a little bit. But this is where you should be looking for, hey, what's sort of that next net new thing that Microsoft is thinking about for their browsers. And you'll see a lot of the other browsers thinking about this as well. Now for the stuff that's just like bleeding, hemorrhaging edge, we use something called the HTML5 labs for that. And what these are just prototypes that we put up, and we ask people for feedback, looking at how they would use it. And then what happens is that we hopefully will go through that same process where there's this kind of cool new thing, maybe let's call it the hologram tag. The hologram tag will then move into the IE platform preview, and then at some point we'll actually go ahead and release it. So that's kind of the thinking that we sort of go through when we're thinking about some of these features. Because one of the things that we do is we really are aligned with the W3C. And the W3C, if you don't know who they are, is they're the web standards body for a lot of these specs and standards. And we actually work with them. I think we have 16 people at Microsoft who work pretty much hardcore with the W3C, and then we have about another 100 or so who do a variety of things with the W3C. And what happens is a spec, when it's first written up, is just that. It's sort of this first published working draft. So this is kind of the, hey, I came up with a cool idea, I'm going to submit it to the W3C. Then what happens is the W3C then will convert it to a working draft when they say, oh, this makes sense, right? This person who put this spec together isn't some kind of weirdo. Then what happens is that they will go through this process until it finally becomes a recommendation. Now, what's kind of confusing about it is that we're sort of used to a model where the spec gets written and then you write the code and then you do the implementation, right? Well, in the browser world, it doesn't happen that way. Actually, people start writing things much earlier on. So a lot of times you'll see things that are maybe even working draft or last call actually showing up in the browser. And I'll talk about how we get around that without causing a lot of problems. And you can see here that there's a variety of specs in a variety of different states of being turned into a recommendation. In fact, CSS 2.1 that started about 10 years ago just became a recommendation not too long ago. So some of these things take a long time, and that's why we don't wait till the very end before we actually go in and implement them. So how does a browser say, okay, I want to be progressive and I want to do these new things, but yet I don't want to cause suffering of the user base and the developers? And what they came up with is this vendor prefix concept. Now, what you might be saying is, oh my gosh, aren't we going back to the world of the Netscape, Internet Explorer early days where, you know, one browser does it this way and one browser does it that way, and we have to write different code bases for whatever browser we have? Well, the good part is, no, we don't. With vendor prefixes, basically what we do is we say, we know that within a particular browser or from a particular vendor that there is a feature that is still being worked on. So what we'll do is we'll actually go ahead and prefix it here. So here, for example, you have border radius, where, you know, Mozilla has its implementation, WebKit would have its implementation, Opera would have it, we could have it as well. But at the end of the day, when the spec is, you know, is done, we're all going to agree that this is what we should use, which is this border hyphen radius, and then give it the pixel definition. So what happens, what's nice about this is that today you can use some of these new things, and what happens is when everyone becomes standardized, you can have this in there as well, and then because of the cascading style rules, it'll use whichever one makes sense. Now, the hard part that we still haven't figured out is how do we get people to go back and remove those vendor prefixes when that stuff starts to go away. But like I said, the good news is that if they are left in there and if it's written right, it'll still go to the original thing that it should be used, even if it doesn't support that vendor prefix anymore. So we've kind of gotten around that issue, and you'll see why. You know, I'm going to show you some things that that use vendor prefixes, and I wanted to kind of lay it out for you why vendor prefixes are kind of, you know, necessary. All right, so this isn't a part of the original talk. It's something I put into every demo, every presentation I do, pretty much, which is, it's my little soapbox opinion that I basically want to eradicate IE6 off the planet. And we want to help you, because what happened was when I took the role as an HTML5 evangelist, I started asking the IE team, and I would ask every single person I talked to, I would say, okay, be serious with me. Somehow we're making money off of IE6, right? There's a reason why this thing sticks around. And every single person, 100%, said, no, we would like it to go away. We just can't make it go away. So it's kind of one of those things. It's kind of like when the apocalypse comes. You know, there's only two things that will be around: cockroaches and IE6. It just won't die. But what we've done is we have a website called IE6 Countdown. Let me flip over here for you. And it has this nice little map. And I'm sure probably you all are probably interested in the biggest one here, which is Australia at 2%, which is good. It'll be great when we get you under 1%. We make a big deal out of countries when they get to 1%. When I was talking to New Zealand last week, they said that they were going to get there first before Australia. I was like, I don't think so. I said, but I will let those Australians know that you said that so that they may have a chance to beat you. And there was a rugby conversation, and it was all kinds of things. So this is a place that you can take folks to. We actually have some information on why it's best to get off of IE6 if possible. Also to, you know, what are the kind of things that we have in place to make it happen. So is it a user that you're talking to? Is it your boss? Is it, you know, an IT, you know, person on how to get off there? So we're trying our best to help you out. I know that there are people in here who are looking at me right now and going, you don't understand. We have to have this. It's unfortunate. And I totally agree. But please let us know how we can be of help, because we just need to get rid of IE6. So that's my soapbox. Okay. So let's talk a little bit about Internet Explorer 10. So like I said, today it's a platform preview. We just released a platform preview 2. We're on point to have more platform previews as well. What we do when we put out a new browser is we actually do limited Chrome. You'll notice that we don't have everything there. And a lot of people complain about that, right? Because they're like, oh, well, I can't really use this, and we're like, well, because it's for developers, and developers are hardcore, they don't need a lot of fancy Chrome. And what we don't want people doing is, updating their grandmother to, the IE10, and, grandma's like, hey, where's the back button, and all those things. And so that's why we kind of limit that browser Chrome, and we really use it for testing. And what we do is we add a whole bunch of new features with each of the platform previews. So here's an example of some of the things that we've added, and those in blue are some of the things we're going to talk about today. And like I said here, we, as a joke, now with more hardware acceleration. But hardware acceleration is truly important because if we're going to build sort of these future modern apps that we've all been talking about, we need something that is fast enough, right? Because, how many times have you heard, oh, JavaScript is slow, the web is slow, that's why you got to do these native things. So with hardware acceleration and a lot of kind of the new performance stuff that's being done, you'll start seeing that things are much faster, not just rendering pages as well. All right, so let's talk about CSS3. Now, a lot of people go, why should we care about CSS3, right? That's what, the guys in the turtlenecks and the, people wearing the real, hippie glasses and things like that care about. I care about, writing some, code. Well, I would say that there's a few reasons, but let me give you sort of a practical example. So there's this little startup in the United States. I don't know if you've heard it or not. It's named Facebook. Anybody heard of them? So they built this little social network, and like with everything, they all sort of start out with someone in their dorm room. If you've seen the movie, you know the details of it. And these things kind of grow on their own, right? And a lot of things happen. Code keeps getting generated and stuff like that. So what they did was Facebook asked this designer named Nicole Sullivan, who just does amazing CSS performance work. And what she did was she took a look at their CSS, and they asked, like, hey, is there anything you could do to help us? And so she took a look at it, and she was kind of surprised by a few things. One is there's 706 CSS files. Now, I don't know about you, but Facebook doesn't look that much different to me when I go page to page. Like, the Facebook color blue is pretty much the Facebook color blue. They use sort of the text for a lot of the similar things. So that wasn't too scary, but what was really scary was that the Facebook color of blue had been declared 261 times. So there were people who were not using that cascading part of cascading style sheets to define the color blue. Instead, they were saying, well, I will just go ahead and define it yet again. So there's those types of things. And then, of course, 548 unique hex colors, 6,400 declarations of color. And they must have used almost just about every web-safe color, in the palette. But what was interesting is that after Nicole got done and she did her refactoring, they were able to reduce response time in half due to the CSS refactoring. So when you think of CSS, yes, it is about styling, content on a web page or a web app, but it's also something that we do have to consider that it can cause issues in the performance of our website, and we need to be aware of that. So the way that we sort of viewed the web in the past few years is actually through a desktop browser, right? We all, whenever we think of the web, we think of, oh, this is, Internet Explorer. My parents believe the internet is called E. They're like, I go, oh, okay, go to the web, open your browser. And they're like, oh, you mean click the E? And I'm like, yes, click the E. Which I'm glad that it's not like click the G, because then I'd be like, oh, Mom and Dad, do you remember where I work at? But that's how we sort of started it. But the way we view the web is very different, right? In fact, it turns out that mobile views of the web are surpassing the desktop views of the web, which totally makes sense. Our devices are becoming a lot more powerful. We have new devices to play around with. There's these tablets that seem to be all the rage with the kids these days that a lot of people are using to surf the web. And then even other things too, like game consoles, televisions, and things like that. Now, in CSS 2.1, we had the ability to say, well, I kind of know that whatever device is trying to look at my website or my web app might be a little bit different. So we had kind of these neat little media types like screen and print that we could use to define if someone was looking at a screen, then we will style the page a certain way. Then we also had print where we could do sort of a print style sheet and things like that. But the challenge was that it wasn't very responsive to the user's display. And it takes a lot of grunt work to do this. So in prior years, I was an ASP.NET evangelist. How many of you all have done ASP.NET or doing ASP.NET? Oh, awesome. Love you all. Well, do you all remember the ASP.NET mobile controls? And do you remember like how all of a sudden we dropped off the face of the planet with those mobile controls? And people were like, what are you all doing? Well, here was the challenge, right? Was that back in the day, you had to define your stylings and things like that based on the device. So what we would do is we would go, oh, do you have a Q device with a BlackBerry, blah 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 blah, and then we would say, okay, we're going to style this way. Oh, if you have this, then we're going to style in another way. Well, now when you look at today, like look at how many Android devices are out there. Imagine if you had to basically do a layout for each and every single particular one of them. It would become a really big hassle. So one of the things that had to change is the way that we could go about going after devices. So there's something beautiful, wonderful in my life called CSS3 media queries. This is probably one of my favorite features. When I became the HTML5 evangelist, I was kind of looking at like, hey, what all is in there? And there was the audio tag and the video tag, and those were cool, and Canvas was cool as well. But really what I found to be something that, wow, I can use this today, and it's going to make my life 100 times easier, that was media queries. And so what media queries allow you to do is to specify it basically specifies methods to enable web developers and designers to scope a style sheet to a set of precise device capabilities. So instead of asking for what is the browser that's being used, right? Because don't we hate it when we upgrade to a new browser, we go to our bank, and our bank tells us like, oh, you're using a browser that's unsupported. And you're like, well, no, I'm using just the new version. And it's like, too bad. That's because what we're doing is we're asking for the browser and we're not asking for the features that it supports. So with media queries, we can actually decide, hey, what are the features that how do we want to render our display based on the features of the device? So let me show you an example of websites that actually use CSS3 media queries. So one of my favorites is the Sasquatch Festival. And this is a festival in the States. And you can see here, it's sort of just this nice little thing. It's got this huge, banner. It has navigation across the way. There's like, 8 items here. There's the sponsorships. There's the things that you can do. You can even play music from the people who are going to be playing there. You scroll down a bit, find more about the artist. There's a nice little blog and things here. But the hard part is that what if you don't have a big, large screen? In fact, let's go ahead and grab our screen and move it down. Well, one of the things you notice is that there was this kind of this change, right, to the display. That it actually kind of got a little smaller as we pulled in the viewport. Let's pull in the viewport a little more. Whoa, this is kind of interesting now. Because what they've done is they've said if there is a small viewport, we're going to do a layout in a very different way, right? So what they did was they decided, okay, what content is important for people who we think are probably on a mobile device? Well, instead of giving them 8 nav options, we're only going to go ahead and give them 4. Also, that big Sasquatch logo, we've now, squashed it down because we don't want people to have to scroll through a lot of stuff to get to the meat that they want. And then they even went so far as to go in and change up the typography a bit on the blog post. So if you didn't notice before, they actually changed the line width between the lines and things like that. And so what's cool with media queries is that you can say, hey, based on the measurements of the window, I want you to go ahead and render this way. And we can also do it in a variety of other capabilities, which I'll show you here in a bit. Let me also show you another example. This is Simon Collison. He was actually one of the first folks to put together a kind of what's called a responsive web design, and I'll actually be talking about that later in the day, and I'll tell you a little more about it. And you can see here again, nice spread out here. And then when I actually go ahead and pull these in, notice that it will go ahead and wrap those things around correctly, and again, a very nice mobile experience, or a small visual experience. And so those are just sort of nice little websites that are sort of adaptive to that. Now, how do we actually build a media query? It's actually pretty simple. In your CSS, what you'll do is you'll do a media rule. So you say @media, and then you define the type, which screen will probably be 9 times out of 10 what you'll use. But you can put things in there like print. There's also television and things like that. And what's kind of nice about this is that it kind of gets us away from one of the problems that we had in 2.1, where there was actually a handheld type. And could you imagine what handheld meant? I mean, today when we think about that, it's kind of preposterous. But what you do is you define the media type, and then you give it the query itself. So in this reference, what we're doing is we're saying, okay, if we're using the screen media type, which any browser will do, and the maximum width is less than 600 pixels, then I want you to go ahead and change the body text to 80%, to a percentage reference. And we have a variety of ways that we can do queries. So here, for example, I can say if the minimum width is 320 pixels and the maximum width is 480 pixels, so somewhere in between our window is that wide, then I want you to go ahead and style things in a certain way. You can also use not semantics, and then you can also use kind of and or semantics as well here. Now, where do you declare these media queries? Well, you can declare them in the style sheet that you're going to use. You can also use import rules as well as link elements. What the kind of going best practice is to actually do it in the style sheet. And the part of that reason why is that because if it's in the style sheet, then you're much closer to the stylings that you're going to do anyway. And so you'll just find that a lot of times most people will show you, here's how you do it with the style sheet, but you may see it outside as well. Now, there's a few media properties that are supported. The ones that you're probably going to be most interested in is the min-max width and the min-max height. But we also have other things. Like one of the things you'll probably think is pretty important is orientation, right? If I have a device and I'm sort of in this portrait mode and then I move it to landscape, I'm going to want to style it, a little bit differently so that it takes advantage of the width and things that I have. You may even want to deal with resolution. So you say, oh, well, if the resolution is high, then I'm going to go ahead and do higher res images. This became really important during the iPhone 4 days when our resolution got a whole lot better. So let's take a look at another example here. Let me click over. And this is all of these examples and demos and links that I'm showing you. I'm actually going to show you where all of this is available at. So don't desperately try to figure out where all of this stuff is at, because I'll have all the links for you and everything. So this is a sample out of an amazing book, and I'll tell you about it in a little bit. And it's called Little P Bakery. And it's pretty simple, right? It's pretty much the thing you've seen on most websites. Kind of 3 layout. At the top, you have your header with your logo. If you scroll down here, you can see that we have these nice little images, and then we have kind of this multi-column look. Notice that our navigation navigation menu over here has kind of stayed static for us. But by the magic of media queries, as we pull in, you'll notice that a few things start to happen, right? So the navigation, what happened was a media query fired off that said, oh, the window has now become a different size, so now I'm going to change the styling a bit. So now we've moved the navigation up to the top, and now we just have a two column layout. Then what we do as we continue to scroll in or to move that window in, you'll notice that the navigation actually got lower and went under our Little P Bakery logo there because we don't want it to go across that. And then down here you can see that we even change now where the images are on the left side, and then if you scroll in just a little more, all of a sudden you notice that our images are much smaller. We've actually started collapsing our menu a bit, so again, when you're thinking about scrolling, you don't have to scroll through a big old nav before you get to your actual content. And so let's take a look here at the code itself. So we can bring up the F12 developer tools within Internet Explorer. So if you're in Internet Explorer, just hit F12. The tools come up. We can go in and take a look at the script. So here, for example, I can scroll down. Now, this is not the best practice. When she wrote this, she actually put the style in the HTML file, and that's good for demo purposes, but you should always keep your styles in a separate style sheet. So we'll look past that for now. But here you can see she started setting up some media queries. So here, for example, she takes a look and says, okay, is the media type screen, and is the minimum width 1200 pixels? If so, I'm going to position things in various ways. So you can see here where she actually does quite a bit of styling based on that. And then again, as you get smaller, so here the width is under 760 pixels. And again, she goes in and starts changing up the nav, floating it left, and also adding a column count of 1 instead of a multi-column count. And then as you continue to scroll down, you'll notice here that as it gets smaller, she actually changes the images that are being used. So she goes to 64-bit transparent pings instead of the 128 that she was working with. And then if we scroll down a little bit more, you'll notice here that she has a screen. She has one for WebKit Min Device Pixel Ratio 2. Does anybody know what device that is trying to accommodate? iPhone 4. And then also 2 higher resolution images for that as well. And so what's kind of nice about CSS3 media queries is the fact that this is something that ships pretty much in every browser today. So you can go ahead and start using media queries, and you can actually implement them in existing apps. So this is one of the few things that you actually go ahead and use, and you're not going to have to change hardly anything in your current existing app. Now, there's a little bit of a challenge with devices. Because what happens is that, and this happens to everybody, it actually happened to me as well, which is you'll do your first media query, right? And you'll start taking that window and you'll be moving it back and forth, right? Which, by the way, once you start learning about media queries, every website you go to, you'll start moving that window back and forth, right? And each time that it doesn't work, you'll be like, oh, what a fail we have here. So it's a curse, it really is. But what happens is that on a mobile device, what you'll do, or I'm sorry, going back to the little story here. So what will happen is you'll use it in a browser window and it'll work out and you'll be happy and you'll be on your merry way. But then what will happen is you'll get your device out, you'll go to the website, and your media query won't work. And you'll be like, what the heck happened? This is supposed to work. And the reason why is because, guess what? Our devices lie to us. Because what you probably did was in your media query, you said, okay, if the width of my viewport is under 380 pixels, then I want to go ahead and style my page in a certain way that's more mobile friendly. Well, what happens is that a lot of the mobile devices out there, what they will do is they will actually cheat and say, oh, no, 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 I'm like just a regular old website. And the reason why is because, have you noticed how kind of the cool modern phones, they'll take a website and they'll kind of scope it to the right appropriate size. It'll be teeny, teeny, tiny, but it's appropriate to the right size. And it's because what they do is they basically tell your website like, oh, I'm really this, instead of its true measurement. And this actually was a big problem when Apple first came out with their web apps, because these CSS3 media queries weren't working very well. So they came up with this concept of the viewport meta tag. And we can go into great detail on the viewport meta tag, but basically think of it as the thing that tells the device, hey, I'm a website that knows that how to deal with mobile devices. So be honest with me. And then what you can do is you can force the issue by saying the content, the width should equal the device width. And it's important to think of device width different than regular width, right? Because on devices, if you ever look, there's not chrome on the edges. So a typical mobile device in their browser being used is actually end-to-end. So you need to make sure that you're using device width instead of just a regular width. Also, you can change the zoom as well. So you can say that, hey, I want you only to zoom to a 1.0 magnification. And the reason why is a lot of times, if you ever are testing this stuff out and you go to a landscape orientation and it doesn't seem to work, that's another thing where you might be like, oh, okay, guess what? It's trying to rescale for me. Because, again, that's what basically the iPad and the iPhone do, is they say, oh, okay, you went to a different orientation, I'm just going to scale it differently. And you may say, no, don't scale it for me. I want control over that via my media queries and via my styling. All right. So what do we do about those browsers that are still around that will refuse to die? How do we support those with these awesome media queries? Well, there's this really cool tool by this gentleman named Wouter van der Graaf. I hope I said his name right. And you can basically do a Bing Google search on CSS3 media queries JS. And this works beautifully. What you do is you take the one line of JavaScript, put it into your code, and then boom, it handles everything for you. You do your media queries just like you've been doing all along. Now, the thing to consider is that this is, because it's so automagical, it also means that there can be just a slight bit of a performance hit there. So you should test it out yourself. There's also another one called respond.js that you could use that's a little bit lighter weight that only supports, I think it only supports width, height, and maybe orientation. I think those are the only three, and I think they're going to add more over time. So these are just some other things that you could use media queries to do for your mobile apps. This is the fun site. If you, again, if you're like me and you just love to look at responsive websites and you like to pull that window back and forth, this is a site of nothing but media queried out websites. And so you can go to your heart's content. And I'm telling you, you will get addicted. So don't go here if you don't have about an hour to spend just moving that browser window back and forth. And you're laughing and you're like, Thomas, yeah, right, I got other things to do. No, I'm serious. You will get addicted to this. Now, if you're having a hard time sleeping at night, then you can go up to the W3C and you can actually go ahead and read the spec. I have tried to be like this really good HTML5 evangelist. I can't get through that spec, no matter how much I love CSS3 media queries. All right, so let's talk about some of the other things. So we have something called CSS3 Grid Alignment Module. And this actually provides us a way to show things within a grid on the page. Now you might be thinking to yourself, well, Thomas, I just use a table to lay out my pages, right? And and we all know, we know we're supposed to be using CSS and floats and things like that, but deep down in our souls at 11 p.m. at night when we've got the thing due at 7 a.m., we're like, oh, well, no one's going to see if I just put a table here. Well, we know what the problem is, right? If we use table for layout, number one, we're not being semantic, right? So people with disabilities, or screen readers, what happens is they go to our table and it says table, and they go, oh, I'm about to get some good table information. And what do they get? They get random gobbledygook, and they go, what the heck? Oh, this person did it the wrong way again. So there's that problem. The other problem too is that tables were not meant to be something of style. So what happens is that if you start using tables to style your site, then what you're basically doing is you're mixing up things, right? Because we know that HTML is supposed to be about structure, right? And the people who have the most adaptable sites are the people who build things where they keep the HTML just for the structure and the content, the CSS for the styling, and the JavaScript for the behavior. Because what happens is no matter what device goes to it, if it's just content, then it's going to render around something okay. So we want to make sure we keep those separate. So what happened was we had CSS floats and everything, and we dealt with that problem. Well, the good part now is that we've actually come up with this grid alignment module. Microsoft actually submitted this with some other people to the W3C. And the other thing is that it now ships in IE10, so you can start actually playing around with it. And what's nice is that you can see this here, for example, is just kind of a real simple grid, but we can have things that actually scale across columns and also scale across rows, and we can actually put things in the various cells of the rows and the columns however we want to. And again, all of this is happening in CSS, so we are separating out that content from the style. Now, how does this magic happen? Well, what we do is we basically give a particular div an ID and the parts of it. And so here, for example, we're sort of doing a game here. And then there's this little thing here, display : MS grid. Now, you would say, well, what is that -MS? Well, if you were listening a little before, you'd figure out that, oh, that's a vendor prefix, and that's exactly it. This is sort of a relatively new thing, so you do have to use the MS grid prefix. And then what you can do is you can define the layout of the grid. So here we define 2 columns. There's an auto and there's a oneifer. And I remember the first time I saw that, I was like, what the heck is a oneifer? I was like, I've never seen this before. Well, it turns out that it means one fraction. And so what's kind of neat with the grid layout is that it actually uses this kind of fractional metaphor where you can say, well, this particular element is either going to be this many pixels wide, so it's fixed, or it can be a fractional element. So I can have maybe, let's say, 4 columns, but I can say one of them has to be 2 fractional elements of the other. I think I talk about that a little bit in my next session. But it makes it very easy to kind of define things in a more fractional manner or a percentage manner versus something that's very fixed. And then what we can do is for each of the items, for example, I'd say I want my title in column 1, grid 1, excuse me. The score can be in column 1, row 3. Then I can do things like my stats, for example. I can actually align it to the top or the start of the cell. And then I can even do things like, for example, my controls here. I can align it in the center, and as well as like my board can go across and span 2 rows. So this is actually kind of neat because one is we can very easily create sort of this table grid-based layout, which, by the way, grids have been with us forever, right? I mean, if you even go back in art history a long, long time ago, there was all the real rich stuff, right? Where, it was, cherubs that looked really visual and real and stuff like that. And then, the Swedish folks and the Swiss folks came in and were like, no, everything must be modular and grid-like. And so, like, even art went in that direction. And it's actually, they've done studies that show that we like to think in grids. When we do like streets, for example, most of the time, unless we have mountains to go around or hills to go around, we will specifically put things in grids because it is something cognitive in humans that make it much easier to understand. Now, what you may say is, well, oh, Thomas, you just showed me something with a vendor prefix, and it only works in IE, so I can't use it, and and I want the grid because I love the grid. Well, this really cool guy, Aaron Gustafson, super smart guy, he actually built this tool called Extender, and it's actually a series of things that allow you to do things in older browsers or in non-compliant or in browsers that don't support a particular feature for a particular feature. So what he did was he actually did CSS3 grid alignment. And what's good about Aaron Gustafson, and I always say this for all these kind of libraries, is he's committed to doing this. So it's not something that all of a sudden will disappear one day. So you can kind of believe that even though it's at version 0.2, he will be moving it to 1.0. And we've actually worked with him on some other things as well. All right. So we now know that we can look at a device, we can look at the devices that are going to be used to view our website or our web app. We can also deal with sort of the page layout. But what do we do about sort of items within a contained space, right? Because what typically happens is that you'll have actually better for me to show you. And I love this. It's called CSS3 Flexbox Flexin. And I'm using the wrong browser version, so let me pop open the right browser version. So we're going to look at this in 10, because that's where it's supported. There we go. Let me pop it up here a bit for you. Okay. So we have sort of this container element, right? So we have this kind of brownish div, and we have 4 items in the container. But typically what would happen is if we tried to just simply float these, whenever our window would be much smaller, we would actually pop out of the container. So it wasn't very unusual for us to say we have these really high def monitors and go, oh, this looks genius, it looks beautiful, and then you send it to your manager who's still rocking an 800 by 600 screen and complain about the fold. I'll stop right there. I'll go nuts off of the fold. But what will happen is they'll look and your layout is all messed up. So now there's this thing called Flexbox, which allows you to go in and specify, for example, that I want to align things within a container. I'd like to justify them. I can vertically align them via the top, bottom, center. And then I can even decide the items within that container, whether they flex or not. So here again, we're going to go ahead and grab that window. And notice that, one, as they get closer and closer, they don't necessarily pop out of their container, but that even those middle boxes are now starting to change their size. And so how does that actually work? Like this. So here, for example, if we just had no styling, we have a div called play control and then 3 buttons, this is what it would look like. But if we were to go and take that and shorten it, we would notice that forward button would probably go outside of its containing element. So what we can do is we can say, well, this play control, we are going to give it a display of MS Box, and then we can say for the button, we only want it to flex 1, which basically means fill up the entire amount proportionally. So you can see here where we have these 3 show up proportionally in size. And then we can even create sort of this collection container where we actually can tell it, hey, if the size gets smaller, then what I want you to do is I want you to go ahead and move these and float these down. And so what will happen is if I continue to push this over, then it'd be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 until finally it would go horizontal. And then, or vertical, yes. And you can also define things whether they are horizontal or vertical. And again, all of this is about giving you more fine-tuned control with a level of responsiveness. There's also a multi-column layout that's been introduced in IE 10, which is in a lot of the other browsers. So what's nice about this is you won't have to use a vendor prefix to make it happen. But basically the way that it works is, I can just show you. Here we go. In that, what we'll do is we'll have some text and some images, and you'll see how things kind of float around those. It says it's beagles, but those are actually my pets. My wife has this rule that I can travel if I include pets in my presentation. So this is my thing for her. So that's why it's not beagles. But what happens is that we can say for this content, we'll give it a column count of 3. So no matter how I push these in and out, I will always stay with 3 columns. The other thing that you can do as well is you can define a pixel width amount as well. So I can say each column can only be 200 pixels, and if you pull it out more, make more columns for me. If I push and it looks like it's going to go under 200 pixels, then go ahead and shorten the amount of columns and just make the content longer. So again, all of this is about being more responsive. And then we have this kind of cool feature called position floats that we just introduced in the Platform Preview 2. And what this is you can actually take a div and you can just say, I want to positionally place it and let all of the text kind of wrap around this. So this is good for if you're, if you have like let's say a blog magazine or something like that, and you wanted to put, unfortunately an ad there, or you put some kind of call out and things like that. And again, just giving you a little control while, staying responsive. And the way that works is that you can see here we have a position float. We define what it is, and then we basically give its float property MS positioned. And in this instance, we've said the position is absolute, and that things should wrap around that. And again, you have various different positioning things you can use. So you can do static, fixed, relative, absolute. There's a lot of different things that you can do as to how you want that. Position floats is fairly new, so you won't find that a lot of the other browsers have this. This is probably one of the few that is like way, way, way forward thinking. So you might want to kind of be aware of that. And I'm not aware of any polyfills or shims for it now, but I would imagine within the next 3 months there will be something there. So if you look at all of this stuff put together, the way to sort of think about it is that when you're about to put together a website or a page, you should first think about the device families that are going to look at it. And this is where the media queries come in. And so you sort of have to think about how that is going to work. Then the second thing to do is you actually begin to think about the real estate on the page itself. And this is where you should be using something like grid layout. Then within that grid, you should also think about what are the adaptive components that we can use. So Flexbox is a really good one to use today. Multi-column is a good one to use today. And then, like I said, position floats, you want to be a little bit careful, but you can begin to think about how those are going to be a part of your app. Now, I've showed you sort of kind of things, kind of separate, but let's take a look at all of them together. So I'm going to go back to the IE test drive, which, by the way, a lot of these demos are at. I'm going to go down to Griddle. And Griddle is actually based on a website called Dribbble. And if you're not familiar with Dribbble, Dribbble is a website for designers to kind of show off things that they've been doing in Photoshop or any kind of design. So what they'll do is they'll take like a little snapshot, and it's kind of like saying to everyone, hey, look at this thing I'm working on, give me, some feedback and things like that, and you can vote them up and stuff like that. So it's pretty cool. And what this basically is it sort of takes the Dribbble API and kind of pulls in that information and allows us to style it in different ways. So you can see here, it does have a responsive design. So when I start pulling in things, you'll notice that we begin changing the look and feel. In fact, as I pull in, you'll notice that, let me bring this up, get this out of the way. You'll notice that, well, let's see. Here we can take a look at, various bookmarks and things like that. So it has more of a vertical perspective here, but as we get out wider, the debuts you can see below become something that you can vertically scroll. So you can see here how we do that. Also notice too that the text, instead of kind of moving that text down like we did in the earlier sample, it actually uses the ellipses that you can do as well, which is kind of pretty cool. And this is just kind of a good one I would recommend that you just kind of download and play with, or better yet, just use F12 to take a look at it. So here, for example, let me try to get this in Okay. What you can do is you can hit the little pointer here, which allows you to select an element. So here, for example, if I select this, I can see here that it's actually using the grid column and grid row here. And there's a lot of interesting things here. So let's see, for example, let me click on this. And we can see that this area actually uses the box alignment as well. So the earlier box thing that I showed you, shows up here. We can change the orientation of it and even the box pack as well. And you can go in here and change these items and look at them on the fly. And I'll show you an example of how that works here in about 2 minutes. So this is a really great one to play around with if you want to see all of the things that I showed you working together. So let's talk real quick with the little bit amount of time that we have left about fonts. So there was a new font distribution introduced called WOFF, which is the Web Open Font Format. And what this was to do was to actually fix a problem that we all had, right? Which was how many of us hated the fact that we only had this like small handful of web fonts that we could use that were web safe, right? So you would go, well, we'll use Arial for this, we'll use Verdana for this, and oh, we're going to get real sexy now and use Georgia for that. And that was all we could use. But we had all of these great fonts. But the problem was that there was a lot of issues with fonts, the way that they rendered on the web, for one, because a desktop font and a web font aren't exactly equal. Also, there was a lot of things that we have to deal with, like size, for example. How big is it? How big is this font that's going to have to be put down on people's machines? And then also some licensing things. So there's a cool application that was built called Lost Worlds Fair. Let me bring that up here. And what we did was we actually talked to some designers and people who are really into typography. And we asked them, hey, create sort of a cool concept. And what they came up with was, what if the world had these World's Fairs that we just really never knew about? So, for example, they did an example of what happens if there was one on the moon. I'm going to open some of these others. So here, for example, you would look at all of this, like all of the text that you see here, and you would think, oh, those are images, right? Because what we used to have to do is always use some kind of image if we wanted to show off real fonts. No, these are all fonts. So you can actually go in and you can select them as you would text. So you can see how all these things are now selectable. So that's kind of interesting because now what happens is because there's text on there, we're going to have better SEO, right? Because now we actually have content versus just images with text labels and things like that. So this was a good example of one of them. Then they also did an Atlantis, and this one's kind of fun because you can actually scroll down, and you're in your little elevator, and again, at different points in time, they show off some cool, font porn for you. And then as you get all the way down, to the deep sea, you find out, there is Atlantis. And then there's also one that here was the El Dorado Fair, which is kind of cool because if you, again, are interested in, pulling that window, notice that the blimps here move along with it. They're not just images that get overlaid, but they actually are kind of have a parallax effect to them. But what's also kind of cool is the fact that to make changes or to prototype with this stuff, it's a lot easier, right? Because, for example, what happens if the pointy-haired boss came in and said, oh, no, we were wrong. It wasn't 1924 this was at, it was 1934. What's that going to look like? Well, what would we have to do? Got to open up Photoshop, got to change it, got to put it back in, blah, 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 yada, yada, yada. Well, now what you can do is you can show your boss by hitting F12, select the 2, go in, find it here, change the text to 3, and now we get to see what it looks like with a 3 instead of a 2. So, by the way, if you haven't played around with the F12 tools, I would absolutely tell you to take a look at them. I would say between 80 and 90% of all the problems that get sent to me as to like, hey, why isn't this working, or why is it doing this? 80 to 90% of the time, I solve it just via the F12 tools. And what's also cool too is I can go in and change things, see how they look without messing up the actual page itself. And then when I figured out, oh, this is the fix, then I can just save it off and then give it back to the person, and they can put it into their project. So the way that the way that this works is that you declare a font face. So you give it a font family, and so this could be my font or whatever the font you use. You give it a URL source, a format type, Unicode range. A lot of these things are optional as well. They have sort of default values. And then when you're ready to apply that font, you basically can declare the font family of a particular element, like a paragraph element, to now use these fonts. Now, here's some things that you should consider when you're going to use fonts. And by the way, this is pretty much something that can be used in any of the modern browsers today. So this is, again, another thing that you can have fun with. First off, if you're going to go with a hosted model, so there's things like Typekit, for example, that actually host your font. So it actually, when someone goes to your site, they actually go and grab that font off of their site to actually install it. You need to think about it being CDN based. So what you don't want to have is your fonts having to be dragged from halfway across the world over to somewhere else. Also, be aware of the font file size. So if you have a font, don't use the 16 different iterations of it, from italics and bold and semi-light, light and regular and heavy, things like that, because each and every time your download is going to get bigger and bigger. Also, you want to ask them if they do any type of hinting. And what hinting is it says within the metadata of the font package, we've basically put hints in on how to look and act within various devices or browsers. And so what hinting is that it's kind of them taking the time to go, we know that things look a little bit different, a font looks a little bit different on Windows than it does on Mac OS. So we're going to go in and we're actually going to fine-tune the details for that. If you find that they're talking about hinting on their website, you're probably talking to a very top reputable folks who do this kind of stuff. You also want to look at licensing, because what will happen is you'll see things where it'll be like, free font. But the licensing may not be for the web. It may only be for the desktop. For example, I just bought a font, Pluto. And I bought every version of Pluto for it, and it was $300. And yes, most people don't like to buy fonts at $300, but this is a beautiful, beautiful font, and I love working with it. Am I getting the... Oh, okay. I thought maybe that was the music to get thrown off. Okay. Whew. But what you want to do is you want to make sure that you get the right license. So for example, the $300 font was actually about $1,200 if I wanted to use it on the web. So you got to be very careful with that. Also make sure that you put your font face declaration at the top of your CSS file as well for performance reasons. And again, I recommend Typekit for hosting. If you want just something free, you can go to fontsquirrel.com. It has commercial-free fonts, and what it will do is it'll actually build out the font face declarations and the package for you. It basically does everything, again, for free. Also, I want to tell you about this really cool tool. It's called CSS Lint. It was built by Nicole Sullivan and another person who escapes me. Nicole Sullivan was the one I talked to you about who did the work for Facebook. And she basically built this linting tool that you just cut and paste your CSS in, put it in there, run it, and it kind of tells you, what's good and what's not. Don't get freaked out, because sometimes it's a little aggressive as to what it thinks is good or bad. Then if you're into the little web fights that there are, the designers are now getting onto each other's where, it's like, oh, it told me that I'm not supposed to be using, a bunch of IDs, but I use IDs all the time. Me too, no, you shouldn't. And there's all that mess, and, don't even worry about that. Just try it out, see if it works for you. But like I said, it's a great way of knowing for sure that you're writing really good CSS. I do not get paid for this book, but I wish I did because I absolutely love it. It's called Stunning CSS3 by Zoe Mickley-Gillenwater. And the reason I like this book so much, if you're interested in the things that we talked about today, is because it's not just a regurgitation of the help file, which I get mad when I read a book and I go, oh, they read the help file or they went to a Microsoft event and they just wrote everything out. What she does is she actually does it in a work format so that you actually go in and you build real world stuff. And she doesn't go, and you do some magic stuff and then it all works out in the end. Because I've had books like that as well where you're like, hey, where did steps 7 through 20 go, This one walks you through that. It's a really, really good book. So I totally recommend. I bought not only the physical version, but I actually bought the digital version because I'm constantly going back to it. And she talks a lot about a lot of the new stuff like Flexbox and multi-column and things like that. So I know we are very much at the end, so I wanted to just say a few things. One is that I have a second session that is about responsive web design. So we're going to talk a little bit about media queries again, but there's a lot of other things that we didn't discuss. So if you're interested in, hey, how can my websites respond and react to various different devices, and how do I do things like create percentage-based proportional websites versus hardcore fixed sites, this is going to be an awesome thing to go to, but it's messed up on the schedule. It's actually today at 5 p.m. in meeting room 5, and it's kind of cool because I'm talking about something that's a concept and not a product. So you'll know no marketing fluff there. My deck demos and all the links that I showed you today are at my blog at asimplepixel.tumblr.com. And if you like this kind of stuff, you can follow me. I'm Tommy Lee on Twitter, and no, I'm not that Tommy Lee. I can always tell when I get someone who thinks they're following him, their picture looks a lot different than the people who normally want to follow me. So every once in a while I'll be like, hey, just to let you new followers know, I'm not that Tommy Lee. So thank you very, very much. I appreciate it.